next time. Thank you.
Present.
Beautiful. So with that, we do have a quorum, and so I'd like to begin by just really quickly recapping what we discussed at the last meeting, sort of for purposes of catching us up and giving us a framework for the other items on our agenda, which really continue to be about planning. So for those who missed the first meeting, or to recap for those who were here, the Affordable Housing Trust is statutorily established through Massachusetts law that a number of cities and towns have across Massachusetts that allow the city or town to put aside a certain amount of funding that can be voted on by the trust to be used for affordable housing ideas and concepts across a number of dimensions. And so really kind of the flexibility is limitless in terms of it's really up to us as a board and as a community to decide what we want those priorities to be to utilize this funding. So it, you know, when you look at, and we'll get into this, some things that other communities have done, it's everything from rental assistance programs to maybe assistance to home repairs for low income or seniors or folks that may, you know, have trouble affording to stay in their homes, to emergency assistance programs, to some of the more ambitious are actually, you know, funding deed restrictions on apartments or condos to keep them at a certain affordability level, or even building affordable housing or preserving affordable housing. We have a pretty limited budget at this point, which we'll get into a bit in terms of funds that we have at our disposal, but I think it was good to get a presentation of what is done statewide just to give us, just kind of get the ball rolling and start to get some ideas on what we want to do. So that's kind of what we went over in the intro, is what an affordable housing trust is, as well as what are some things that they can do and do in other communities. We had a wonderful presentation from Mass Housing Partnership, which that slideshow is available to everyone. I believe it's on the public website in addition to in everyone's email, just to kind of get the ball rolling. And so, and we kind of broke with, we wanted to start thinking about early goals and mission statement and kind of things that we want to work on. Before we move towards getting some comments from Chief of Planning and Development for the city, I do want to just see if, you know, Jan, I know that you weren't present at the first meeting, so I want to turn it over to you first. I'm sure you had a chance to review either the meeting or the materials, and wanted to get maybe any initial thoughts from you regarding focus areas or things we should be doing at the beginning, and then also maybe introduce yourself if there's audience out there that hasn't had a chance to meet you yet.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jan Dumas. I am the member of the committee who lives in an affordable housing development in Revere. I live in Ward 2. Sorry, I cannot make it today. I don't have a vehicle and I have a little bit of a cold. I don't want to share. One of the things I'd like to see us start doing is providing help for people who need repairs on their property, especially for the elderly, to keep them in their homes a little bit longer, and to work with some of the property owners who have apartments on their property where they own the home and rent the apartments, and work with them to make the apartments more affordable, and hopefully work with a local developer. I know that there are a lot of buildings being taken down and turned into more apartments, different types of apartments, perhaps even make some of them affordable, even if they are the smaller type units that are coming in place. Thanks for a chance to speak, Joe. I'm turning it back to you.
All right, well, thank you, and we're excited to have you part of this. Obviously, anyone that's active in the community likely already knows Jan because she seems to be have endless energy to serve on so many different committees and councils and boards, and the community's richer for it. So we're glad that you're part of this as well. To my other colleagues on the board, I just wanted to see if you had any reflections on that first meeting, or maybe things that you think I missed to summarize for anyone who's maybe tuning in for the first time.
Well, as you said, it was a great first start to get us accustomed or exposed to the options available for us to build a mission statement, to build on working through partnerships to develop opportunities for affordable housing. And I look forward to continuing that. But yeah, as you said, it's a great first step. And if anyone who has an opportunity to look at those slides or review the deck, I highly encourage you to do so.
Okay, the last meeting was very important. The highlights from different projects on different cities in Massachusetts that you already have affordable housing. And it's good to know how in other cities they have developed that kind of projects, and for the base of the community. And I think we can copy on the good way for our city, for our residents. And especially because right now they have so many residents, they have to move out because they are not affordable in this time in our city. And they just have long time living, like 10, 15 years. But for the crisis that is current right now, not just in our city, it's Massachusetts and all country, I think we can copy the same steps that are another cities that are doing for affordable housing, and will be great for Revere.
Thank you, and you did touch on an important point, which I didn't mention in my summary, but I think is always important to emphasize, is that, the issues that we're facing in Revere, every community faces its own unique challenges, but the challenges that we're facing are part of a broader trend, right? That's something that, for better or for worse, we kind of need to acknowledge that when we think about the scope of our work, the effectiveness of our work, is that Revere is a piece of kind of a broader regional challenge with housing. And so we are experiencing our portion of it, but certainly not the only ones to do so. Now, to give maybe that big picture overview, I think one of the things that's helpful is to maybe look back on some of the data that the city's already gathered, because we've talked about doing some data gathering, some research. The city's done a bit through the years, through the master planning process and through the work of the Planning and Development Office. And I wanted to have an update on sort of some of what we know and what we have on Revere's housing stock, existing kind of either plans or goals or things that we're working on in terms of plans or goals, and opportunities to collaborate, with the city to make it hand in hand between the board and the Planning and Development Department. So with that, and I'm gonna see if I get this name exactly correct, you can let me know. Tom Skwarowski, was I close?
That was perfect.
That was perfect. Okay. All right. I'm 1 for 2, so hopefully I get them all next time. Tom, in addition to speaking here from the table, also has a slide presentation, which I gave you the permission to share screen. So hopefully we can get that onto the Zoom so the folks at home can watch. We got great footage here of us opening up PowerPoint. It's compelling television. Excellent.
Great. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak here tonight. Nice to see everyone. And Jan, nice to meet you virtually. Look forward to meeting you sometime in person. And certainly anyone else on the local television audience. My name is Tom Skwarowski. I'm the Chief of Planning and Community Development for the City of Revere. And I just want to take an opportunity to talk a little bit about, as Joe had mentioned, kind of where we've come, the data we've collected in the Next Stop Revere master plan, but also get a little bit of an update as to where we sit today. I heard Layla mention the crisis that we're in with regard to housing affordability, and I think some of that will be borne out in the data that we're going to be looking at that really paints a pretty clear picture for the need here in the community. And then I want to talk a bit about what the Next Stop Revere master plan outlined as some possible action items for us to take on this challenge head on. And then specifically talk about a few things that my department is working on and some things that we see as kind of high leverage opportunities to make some big change and to create more affordability for Revere residents. And then I'll close things by talking a bit about the housing production plan, which I think was referenced in the last meeting and is something my department will be taking on in the new year and hopefully as we'll discuss in partnership with the trust here. So I'll get right into it. The Next Stop Revere Master Plan painted a pretty clear need for housing affordability in the city of Revere. One of the things they did in doing so was compared the city to our peers throughout the region, and, you know, looked at Everett, Lynn, Malden, Chelsea, and compared them all to Revere. And one of the things that they found in this study was that we, amongst those communities, had the lowest household median income amongst our peers, but at the same time had the highest rents, which, you know, placed some pretty clear burdens for affordability on our residents. And I'm sure none of that is news to anyone here this evening. They also took a look at the need with regard to our low-income population who would be eligible for affordable housing. And, you know, about 12,200 as of, you know, the 2011, 2015 census were considered low-income households. And, you know, certainly those households ran the gamut from, you know, on the spectrum of low to extremely low income, from small families, elderly non-families, and, you know, a little bit of everything. There's a pretty wide spectrum as to, you know, what constitutes low-income households in the city.
Tom,
yes.
mind if I interrupt you for a moment, just because I see these terms low income, extremely low income, very low income in my professional life, but just kind of to make sure everyone knows, can you give general kind of what those income ranges are for those definitions?
Right, so extremely low income would be 30% of the median household income, and that's a figure that kind of varies according to the household size, but I believe the median household income in the city of Revere is about $72,000. So extremely low would be about 30% of that. Low income would be, again, this depends on the measure taken. I'd have to dig a little bit deeper into the data, but generally it's about 60%, between 60 and 80, and then very low income would be somewhere in between. So it clearly shows a great need, and as you can see, you know, 44% of that 12,000 households is extremely low income, so a particularly acute need. And what they found of all of the households that are eligible for affordable housing, for every 7 households that are eligible, there's 1 unit of subsidized housing available. That means deed-restricted affordable housing that will be affordable, you know, for the foreseeable future, as opposed to a home that rents might be affordable, but nothing stopping a landlord from this year to the next raising rents above that level where it's no longer affordable. So it painted a pretty clear need, and again, this was all part of the master planning process. It took place in 2019, so I thought it'd be appropriate to show an update as to where we stand today, and unfortunately, it's not better. And you know, I picked a somewhat arbitrary time frame of 2015 just to take a look at, you know, how far we've come from 2015 to today. According to Zillow, we have a 79% increase in sales prices from 2015 to today, from 308,000 to about 554,000, and it's much the same for rent. But I'll kind of dig it a little bit deeper into what that figure means. So if you're going to buy a home at that figure, $554,000, you need a down payment of about $110,000. The monthly payment required would be about $2,500 a month, and assuming kind of a bank underwriting guideline of 28% debt-to-income ratio, you know, which means you're not spending more than roughly 30% of your income on housing. That would put the average household income needed to buy a home today in Revere at about $109,000. And just for context, as of the 2020 census, the median household income in the city was $73,000. So what does that all mean in layman's terms? You know, it means that the average person, the average household in Revere could not buy a home in Revere if they were searching on the open market today. So, you know, sales prices have increased exponentially, and it's becoming harder and harder for people to afford a home to buy. And again, it's not much different for rentals as well. So in a comparison of fair market rents, what I did was I used HUD's model of fair market rents that actually looks at the full region, Boston, Cambridge, Quincy metro area, so kind of the greater Boston area, if you will. But as Joe had mentioned earlier, these are regional trends, and it's important to pay attention to that. I'd love to dig deeper and get some local data, but I think what you're going to see here tells us a story quite similar to what we saw with home sales. So for a one-bedroom in 2015, rents were about $1,200 a month. For a two-bedroom, about $1,500 a month. For a three-bedroom, about $1,800 a month. And a four-bedroom, just a little above $2,000. In 2022, a one-bedroom has seen an 83% increase from that figure. It's now almost $2,200 a month. And if you're paying attention, that's as much as a four-bedroom cost just 7 years ago, or roughly the same. $2,600 for a two-bedroom, a 76% increase. $3,200 for a three-bedroom, about 72% increase from the 2015 figure. And a four-bedroom, $3,500 a month, roughly 75% increase. So the figures that we saw in the 2019 master plan, the data and statistics have only really painted a bleaker picture here for affordability. And in terms of our housing stock and where we sit today, oftentimes the sort of gold standard across the state is meeting at minimum the state's target for affordability set forth in Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40B, which states that every community should have at least 10% of their housing stock to be affordable. So we've got about 22,000 housing units in the city of Revere. So our target for meeting that 10% threshold would be about 2,200 units to hit that 10% figure. As of 2020, when the most recent statistics were collected at the state level, we had 1,700 units roughly, and about 7.9% of our stock was considered deed-restricted affordable. And I'm sure everyone has seen a lot of cranes and building taking place throughout the city, from Revere Beach to Suffolk Downs and everywhere in between. And if you consider all the building that is taking place and is currently in the pipeline, including Suffolk Downs, we're going to see a big increase in our housing supply, which is great, but not too much of a change in terms of the deed-restricted affordable units. So if we consider the full build, and this is admittedly a little bit of a back-of-the-envelope calculation within my department, taking into account all the things in the pipeline, but we're looking at about a 3,000 unit increase over the next 10 years or so. And of those 3,000 or so units, you can see it's a pretty modest, about 60 units that are deed-restricted affordable, and that actually brings our percentage of affordable units down even lower. So were we to meet our 40B compliance with the state, we'd need to build at least 700 additional affordable units, which paints, I think, a picture of the challenge we have in front of us and the work we've got ahead, both within my department in the city and the trust fund board here tonight.
And Tom, can you give just, for maybe those that aren't as familiar with 40B, so with the city not being compliant with that, what are some of the ways that can operationalize itself in terms of projects and their ability to kind of go through streamlined zoning processes and things like that?
No, great question. So 40B was created to incentivize local communities to build affordable housing, deed-restricted affordable. And if you don't meet your 10% target, there are some other ways that you can protect yourself from this, which I'll get to later on in the presentation. But if you don't meet your 10% target, you're actually open and vulnerable as a community to a 40B development, which basically means that a private developer can come in and say, well, this town is not meeting their 10% requirement, so we can actually circumvent local land use, local zoning laws and work with the state, provided that they have a percentage of their housing stock that they produce as affordable. So, let's say that in one neighborhood there's a 5-story limit for how tall a housing development can go. They could go to the state and say, we want to build an 8-story development, and we're including affordable units, so we feel as though we don't need to abide by the local housing rules that are set forth in the zoning. So it can make a pretty big impact, and I suspect with all the housing pressure we have, if we don't meet our 10% target, we'd be vulnerable and susceptible to such a development.
Yeah, and to be clear, so if that process is triggered, that's something that's not within the control of the city council, not within the control of kind of local officials. That's something that kind of goes through the state.
Right. I mean, it certainly is a conversation that we are a part of, but we don't have the same level of oversight or control, to be sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, given the scope of the need, the Next Stop Revere Master Plan put together an action plan, and this is all available on our website and broken down by different chapters, everything from housing to open space to transportation. But the housing action plan in particular was broken down into 3 goal areas. And I'm not going to go into great detail, but I'm going to pick apart a few different things that were called out in the plan. The first goal area was all about programming and partnership strategies, and one of the things they talked about was strengthening the existing first-time homebuyers program with additional funding, and I believe that's something Anayo had mentioned at the last meeting. And I know we had a good discussion about the various resources that are available at the state level, such as the Mass Dreams program and the Mass Housing Down Payment Assistance Program, both of which can provide some pretty hefty support to local home buyers, but it might be something we want to further sort of market and advocate for our residents in the city to take advantage of. Another item was establishing a dedicated lead staff to create an Office of Housing Stability, and that position was created and was housed within my department. The Housing Stability Officer recently moved on to another position within the city, which we're really excited for the Housing Stability Officer, Valentina Moreno, to get that opportunity for a promotion. But unfortunately, right now, the Stability Officer position is vacant. We're searching and working with the city on getting that position filled as soon as possible. And, you could see some of the other ones listed here, such as employer-assisted housing partnerships, home improvement loans for income-eligible homeowners. I believe I heard Jan mention that earlier. None of the other items mentioned there's really been any progress updates on, but just worth noting. And once again, you can get more detail on the website. And in terms of land use and regulatory strategies, certainly drafting and adopting the inclusionary zoning ordinance was something that was tried this summer. It unfortunately didn't pass city council, but we certainly have the zoning ordinance there and ready to go. And just for the benefit of the audience, inclusionary zoning means that within any major housing development that would take place within the city, there would be a percentage of that housing stock that would be deed restricted affordable. And I believe in our case it was 12%. And again, that went through and was drafted with the support of MAPC, went through the city council process this August, but unfortunately did not pass. But one item that did pass through was related to accessory dwelling units. A lot of folks might know of these colloquially as in-law apartments. And that did pass through, which was a great benefit, and I think will be a great way to incentivize some smaller scale housing development and hopefully build a more affordable stock throughout the city. And then the last area of strategy was really planning and production. And one of the items they called out in the plan was adopting a state-certified housing production plan. And a housing production plan is something that is another way that a community can kind of protect itself from a 40B type development. If you aren't meeting your target, a housing production plan is basically a plan that you put together. You have certified by the state that says, yes, we are not at our 10% threshold, but here are the steps we're taking to get there. It's coupled with annual goals and strategies and how to achieve it. And is one way if a development comes to the state and says we want to work around the local zoning, the state would look at that and say, well, Revere has a plan in place. Here's how they're working towards it. So I think that's a good strategy that we're looking to adopt as a department, and I'll talk a little bit more about how perhaps that's something we could work together in partnership with on. the trust fund on. Establishing a housing trust fund, we did it, we're here, that's great. Let's celebrate our successes. As I know, not all of the items here we were able to accomplish thus far. And then partnering with the Revere Housing Authority to improve and expand the stock of affordable housing. I wanted to pick that item because it was something that was brought up throughout the Revere High School project as they were looking at different siting strategies. I know they looked at the fact that the Housing Authority has a great deal of land that they own throughout the city, and I think in partnership with the municipality could be a great way to create more and higher quality housing stock in the city, and particularly in those areas. So that was one of many areas that we've highlighted subsequent to this plan as a department that we'd like to use our local authority to try to build and really lead by example by creating more affordable housing. So again, the Housing Authority partnerships, we've got a lot of properties owned by the Housing Authority that are pretty sparsely populated in terms of density, and it could be an opportunity to build more within a pretty vast area, you know, multiple city blocks you're seeing here on the Coolidge Street site. Similarly, we've got another partner at the state who owns a lot of land and some underutilized land in particular, the MBTA, both at their Beachmont station and at the Wonderland station have large surface parking lots, both of which were much more heavily utilized pre-COVID than they are today. And certainly with the Wonderland station, a new parking garage was built, which to some degree obviated the need for the surface lots. So we are looking as a city to partner with the MBTA, who's been very adamant about building more transit-oriented housing, more affordable housing close to transit sites. And we feel like this is an opportunity for the state to put their money where their mouth is too, and work with us on building more housing, and particularly affordable housing in these areas. Another area my department will be looking at developing more housing, creating an environment where more housing could be produced is through tax title properties that are foreclosed through you know, lack of payment of taxes and ultimately get turned over to the city. This is something I did in my prior role in the city of Fitchburg. This is actually one of the sites that we sold through tax title RFP. And what we did is we basically created a set of criteria for what we wanted to see for a development, put it out for proposals, and in this case we had an acre site just about a quarter mile from the commuter rail station that was purchased by the Worcester Community Housing Resources Group, WCHR, and they're building 15 affordable townhouse units on the site. And I think this is a good example of us being able to use the existing property that we have instead of just selling to the highest bidder at auction, which is what we often do, really setting forth our values for what we'd like to see, and in particular affordable housing development. We could get some really good movement on production there.
Do you envision those opportunities for that process to include the Affordable Housing Trust, and what might that look like?
Yeah, I certainly could, and I know it was also mentioned, I believe, in some of the planning documents, or at least in the presentation at the last meeting, that we could also take proceeds from auction sales and put it towards the trust to keep things moving. But, you know, I'd be willing to, you know, partner with the trust in any way possible, even if you all wanted to be involved in the process of reviewing any proposals that come in and making decisions, even if it was as simple as that. It'd be great to have your input. And then finally, encouraging private development. And I say encouraging because, you know, since we don't have an inclusionary zoning ordinance on the books, really the best thing we can do is try to partner best we can with developers that are willing to produce affordable housing. And some of you may have heard there was a story in WBUR just this past week about the Lee Trailer Park development right off of North Shore Drive that has been purchased by a developer in recent years, and as the tenants have been evicted to make way for a development, the city wanted to insert ourselves into this and, you know, make the point that this was a property that had a high percentage of affordable homes. They weren't deed restricted affordable, but they were cheap. And removing the trailer park removed the opportunity for affordable housing for a great deal of families in the city. And we immediately started discussions with the property owner to figure out what they could do to help build more affordable housing. And, you know, this project isn't even close to permitting yet, so it's a bit premature to say exactly what will happen, but, you know, we feel pretty strongly about this one in particular, and I'm sure others as they come through the permitting process that, you know, again, through my department and the mayor's office, the best we can do is really encourage affordable housing development to happen. I think the onus is on the special permit granting authorities, city council, ZBA or otherwise, to also share that same mindset. But certainly it's something we'd look for in developments like this and others. And then finally, the housing production plan, just to return to that again, is a 5-year state-approved planning document. It consists of data, an assessment of the local need and demand. So again, I looked at Zillow this morning, and I did a cursory analysis of the fair market rents. But I think a housing production plan would dig a bit deeper into the local data. It would also look at our limitations, both physical and regulatory, for building more housing, and then ultimately dig into some of those locations that might be good sites for housing production. And then finally set some goals and strategies, including an annual numeric target to help us reach our 40B goals. And then, you know, ultimately, that is the scope as certified by the state, but I think we also have some discretion as a community to create a scope that is expanded to include outcomes that we also might want in addition to the boilerplate state document. And I guess expand that further to consider if there were things that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board would like to have considered within this. I'd love to work with you all and partner on a production plan, which, you know, we, again, anticipate taking on in 2023, and could be a nice way to kind of crosswalk with the work that you're doing as a board to build out your mission, goals, and strategies. So at that, that's it. I appreciate your time this evening and happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. I have a couple, but I've blabbed a lot in the middle of your conversation, so I want to just see if you guys, yeah.
I actually have quite a few. I can blab as well, so if you want to go first.
And Jan, by the way, if you have questions at some point, maybe use the Zoom raise hand feature just so I know to call on you.
Sure. First of all, thanks, Tom. That was a very, very comprehensive presentation. I'm a data guy. I really loved all of the facts you put together, particularly in regards to the median income housing and how you started with that, because ultimately income is kind of the crux of affordability. We can build nice houses, we can expand what you called a small scale development, but if the actual price of the rent or the property itself is beyond the means of folks' income, then, you know, then what are we really doing? So I really like the data, and thank you for sharing. Actually, my questions center in and around income. If the income, again, I just was trying to write notes as he said it, was roughly $72K for the median income of folks that live here in Revere, that means that home prices or even just rents are almost beyond their ability to reach, and also just the monthly rents would be a big portion of their monthly income. My question is to you, is what kinds of approach or strategies is being developed to deal with, let's say, the financial strain? Because it's one thing, again, to build the properties, but if your income is only rising by 1%, 2% every 3 years, but we've got inflation and we've got the home prices themselves are growing faster. Are there partnerships that we can develop with financiers or maybe some sort of government programs to adjust? Because I know we mentioned it before, but I keep harping on that because I think that means that not only home ownership, but having access to affordable housing would be out of scope for most folks. And I live with folks around, and I see them housed and live like 4 or 5 families in these very small complexes or small units. And that's one of the main reasons what moved me to join to this department is that, you know, you've got homes, and I'm an outsider, so I have fortunate to, you know, be able to, you know, get a good job and move into Revere, but I see lots and lots of folks that are trapped into these homes, and I too go on Zillow, and I too go on Redfin, and I see that these prices are astronomical. So again, I hate to harp on this, but is there an focus on like financial assistance, not just building the properties or making it incentivizing developers, et cetera?
Great question. So I think in terms of homeownership financial assistance, certainly the down payment assistance programs that I mentioned are one good step in supporting local prospective homeowners, but to the point of everything I shared, you still need to make your monthly payment, and that's going to be a challenge. So that's really only one step in that direction. Certainly, work on first-time home buyer assistance programs would be a really critical next step in working with groups like TND, the neighborhood developers, and their existing first-time home buyers programs to help make sure that people have budgeted properly, have built up their credit and do all the things necessary to be able to afford a home. On the rental side, we've been working with our housing and stability officer, and now through 311, which is kind of picking up the slack once the housing stability officer left, in accessing different state and federal programs. RAFT is a really common one right now, which is rent and utility assistance to local renters in the city. We also, through our CDBG program, have partnered with TND to provide rental assistance to their tenants in their developments. But understandably, all of those resources are still somewhat of a drop in the bucket to the scope of the need that we have. I do think one of the great things about building deed-restricted affordable housing is it means that that housing is tied to 30% of the income of the person who's living there. So the one thing that Next Stop Revere also collected, and it's in the report, and I recommend folks dig into it. They looked at the percentage of households that are overburdened, spending over 30% of their household income on housing, and it's a pretty astronomical figure in the city. And I think the best way we can prevent that is by producing more deed-restricted affordable housing. And I think the one side benefit to that that's never really talked about, or at least not enough, I feel, is that the less money people are spending on housing, the more money they're putting into the local economy. The more money they're supporting businesses on Broadway, the more they're supporting businesses along Shirley Ave, Squire Road. You've got more discretionary income at hand. And I think that's sort of an undersold impact of building more affordable housing is having more money to spend on everything else.
My question is about the percent for the affordable housing on the new buildings that they're gonna be. 10% definitely, 50%, or is?
So of the new development that's currently in the pipeline, I could go back to the figure, go back like 30 slides. But, as you can see in this figure between 2020 and the full build scenario that I outlined, we've got about 3,000 new units that are being built. But of those 3,000, only 60 are deed-restricted affordable. And again, these are all projects that haven't been built yet, but without sort of an explicit commitment to affordability in our zoning ordinance, really the best we can do with private developers is say, hey, can you do the right thing? Can you build affordable housing? And oftentimes they're more driven by market dynamics, and they want to, receive the highest return on their investment. And so that's why, unfortunately, we see what we see today.
Is there an example, or could you envision an example of, because this full build is obviously hypothetical.
Right.
Stuff's been permitted, but it's not done, and
Right.
things change. Obviously we have funding constraints, but in a world that we maybe had a little bit more, is there a possibility of using the resources of this trust to put deed restrictions on some of those units that are coming along, like perhaps in partnership with the private developers that are building them?
Certainly. And I think the one thing we'll need is a lot more money,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I know the trust has a little over $250,000 in the account, if I recall. And that can build about a half of an affordable unit. The cost to build an affordable unit is about $400,000 to $500,000, depending on the project. And that's not for a home, that's for a unit within a larger building, like some of the ones we're going to be building in this full build-out scenario. So it's certainly possible. I think we need to think of a more sustainable funding strategy to help make it happen. The other thing that this could help in securing are some of the competitive grant programs that would allow us to build more affordable housing and incentivize developers to do so. So there's one program called the Commonwealth Builder Program that provides $250,000 per unit for affordable homeownership. And that's anywhere from 80 to 120% of the area median income. And so this is a competitive program, and often what they look for is evidence of a local match. And that might be an opportunity to take a small amount to leverage much larger grant programs that can show our local commitment.
I'm sorry, Tom, you might have already said this before, but can you define what deed-restricted property homeownership is? You mentioned it quite a bit, and it seems a significant portion of one of the ways you can combat this issue of folks, because again, one of the things I'm thinking about is that you have amazing plans to build properties, but what would prevent folks that would just simply come in and bid those prices up? If you have a property that's, of a certain amount, let's say reasonable outside of reveres, like the average income or such, someone just comes in and just scoops it up. Right. What would prevent that?
So it's really, I guess it might be easier to separate it into two different types of deed-restricted affordability, and one is deed-restricted rentals. And so those are rental developments that have a deed restriction placed on them that states, let's say there's 100 units. It states that, 20% of them, 20 of those 100 units are affordable and will remain affordable at a certain income threshold. Generally, it's at or below 80%. And it's actually filed in the Registry of Deeds as a restriction on the property. And the time length can go anywhere from 15 years to 30 years, which is kind of the gold standard. And many are sort of a lifetime deed restriction on the property. If it's affordable home ownership, it's more based off of the purchase price, is based off of the household income of the prospective buyer, and that's really, again, a function of kind of the debt-to-income ratio and all the things that I mentioned before. And there is an opportunity, I think it's worth noting, for wealth building through affordable home ownership because, of course, it allows for just general appreciation of property, even if it is restricted to a certain income. But in both cases, it's deed restricted and time limited. Whatever it is, is often dictated by the funding requirements of, like a mass housing loan would probably state 30 years, but filed in the Registry of Deeds and protected often in perpetuity.
And Tom, I want to, without getting too into the weeds, just kind of go in a little bit more on deed-restricted rental housing that comes as part of a larger development, whether, if we had an inclusionary zoning ordinance, it would be set by statute that it's a certain percentage, but, putting that aside, and you can correct me, with your technical expertise here, but sort of the way that works is, for a developer to set a deed restriction on a certain number of the units in the building, obviously they're making less money, right, in rent than they would if they put it up at the market price, but it costs them, roughly the same to build. And so generally the way that works is either the unsubsidized kind of market rate units, the profit off of that kind of subsidizes the ability to offer the deed restricted units, or there's some sort of subsidy, like either government or nonprofit funding that comes in to sort of subsidize that hit, I guess, for lack of a better term. Is that a reasonable kind of way of laying out what that looks like?
Yes, and I would say there's a third alternative, which is communities can actually provide additional density bonuses or height waivers to properties that are building affordable units. So, you know, if a property was coming in front of the council and asked for the development of 80 market rate units, and the council said, well, how about you build 100 units and 20 of them are affordable? You know, it's something that's done in many communities to provide a density bonus, understanding that there are market pressures and you know, a certain rate of return that's desired, and you know, that's another way around it by providing an incentive within the land use code.
For sure, yeah, I mean, because part of the underlying issue is even beyond subsidized units, but even just for unsubsidized units, because, you know, I think it's appropriate to focus on low-income and extremely low-income families and deed restricted as a main focus, but I mean, the kind of affordable housing, like lowercase, kind of more broadly, includes a lot of, you know, non-deed restricted units too, whether that be an accessory dwelling unit or maybe an older apartment that rents for a little bit less than what something new would be, or, you know, whatever the case may be. And you may have families that are kind of middle class or kind of a smidge above that low income threshold, so they don't necessarily qualify for a subsidized unit, but they certainly still, you know, are feeling the pressure of housing. And what they're gonna feel, as well as the people at the lowest end of the scale, is that it is expensive just to build these developments in the first place. I mean, regardless of the size or scope of it. And maybe you can, you know, for the kind of edification of our viewers, maybe spitball that a little bit or kind of give a sense of it. But it's a very expensive place to build because it's expensive to buy the land. You know, labor is expensive. The fitting in with the sort of regulations, some of which are really good and important, like the safety rules and fire codes and things that we absolutely must have, is expensive to comply with. There's other stuff that's expensive to comply with that maybe is less needed, you know, or less beneficial, but that's kind of a matter for debate. That's why we have these discussions. But, you know, part of the problem, you know, is that just the rental cost that it would cost to clear, you know, kind of what it takes to build these things in the first place is already kind of unaffordable to a lot of people. That's my take on it, and would be curious as to kind of your thoughts there.
Right, and, you know, I think you had mentioned this before being a regional issue, and certainly when you look at the rent figures and the sales prices that we just looked at, they're pretty staggering to look at. And certainly any new developments that you're seeing in the city, you can look at those rent figures, and they're you know, considerably different than what we might have seen 7 years ago, to be sure. But to your point of it being a regional issue, as development is happening, it's always also a matter of, is a developer going to build here, or are they going to build somewhere else? And you know, whether you're talking about Boston or Cambridge or other communities where you can even receive higher rents, there's always that comparative advantage to developing one place versus another. And I think that does play a big role and makes the margins a lot tighter than one would think. Because you'd think, well, they're making a killing on this. Why not just do this? And I think they're all measuring sort of an internal rate of return, and they want to keep it at, you know, somewhere around 15%, let's say. And if it drops below 15%, maybe they can achieve those returns elsewhere, and that's where they'll turn. And I know that was part of the city council's argument, and they certainly also discussed the broader need to just build more housing, which I completely and fully support, looking at our zoning ordinance as a whole and thinking about how we can produce more. Because that's another way, not just by building deed-restricted affordable housing, but by just increasing supply. You know, if you build enough, it will have an effect on prices over time. That's my long-winded answer to your question.
For sure. One thing I'll add to that, and, you know, just kind of my one person's opinion, even though I, you know, agree with that, and that, well, it's not even something to agree with, it's just kind of truth. But that being said, I don't think, you know, that has to be a regional solution, right? Like meeting the affordability challenge of housing in the region through matching supply to meet the demand is not something that one city can do. You know, not even Boston, a city the size of Boston. So certainly a city the size of Revere. I think we certainly can help, you know, and I think we can contribute to it and we can make a difference in that way. But part of the reason why bodies like this are so important and doing things like deed restrictions and subsidy programs is so important is that, you know, we could double the size of the housing stock in Revere, and ultimately we're only making a dent in the regional demand. And, you know, maybe someone that would have otherwise lived in Quincy or in Lynn or whatever lives in Revere because there's a unit there, but it doesn't reduce the kind of overall regional market pressure. So
That's a good point.
it would be nice to think that there's something that we could do policy-wise as a city to kind of solve the housing crisis, but I don't think there is. And not to be defeatist, but I think it kind of just is real to be realistic about the importance of doing kind of targeted programs like we're talking about.
It's a great point.
Well, for the benefit of the folks that are listening, because that is sound a little depressing in the long term and whatnot. If I'm listening to you on the computer right now or on television, and thank you again for your evidence here and your time here. What is there something that you could tell us in a short term that we could do to improve our situation in terms of affordable housing? I know you mentioned websites and things like that, but folks are super busy. And if you could say a website they can go to now, just so they have access to it, or maybe they can Google it or something, such that essentially the question I'm asking, if I'm listening to you right now on television or online, is there a few things you could advise or give me tips in terms of helping me to afford my current rent situation or my aspirations to perhaps be a first-time homeowner? Again, I know there's an exhaustive website online and things like that, but you know, folks are busy and they might benefit just from hearing you say some few tips.
Yep, I'll keep it to three things. I'll try to keep it simple. You know, if you are a prospective home buyer, Mass Housing is the place to go. They have a down payment assistance program. They have the Mass Dreams grant, both of which are $50,000 grants that, in the case of down payment assistance, eligible for only gateway cities, of which Revere's one. So Mass Housing is a great resource for prospective homeowners. If you're a renter looking for resources, we do have a website within the city for our Office of Housing Stability. Although, again, the staff position's not there right now, it does include a host of resources and also contact information for our 311 office that can connect you with resources you might need, like rent and utility assistance. And again, I always look at our partners in the nonprofit world, chief among them the neighborhood developers, who can be a great resource for prospective home buyers, folks that are looking even for rentals, as they do have a good stock both within the city and the region. So those are three places I'd look: Mass Housing, our Office of Stability page within our website, and TND.
Thank you so much.
I did want to make sure, Jan, I just didn't know if you had questions or feedback for Tom, so I wanted to make sure that we didn't forget you on the Zoom screen there.
Thanks, I appreciate that. Yeah, I was about to raise my hand. I was wondering, with that 7.9% that we have right now, do we have a map in the city of where those are, or do we have ideas where we could put them in the future? I don't want them all to be clustered in one area, but I just want to know where they are right now. And I'm sorry, my camera is not working. It seems to think that it is, but it is not.
It's a great question. I believe it's in the housing section of the master plan in terms of a map of where the deed restricted affordable housing is located. If not, it's going to be part of our housing production plan. And certainly, as I mentioned, one of the kind of pillars of a housing production plan is looking at different locations where deed restricted affordable housing could be sited. And I completely agree with you. I think it should be part of our strategy to disperse it widely throughout the city, not just concentrate it in a few select neighborhoods, which isn't good policy.
I do believe that information might be on GIS, Revere's GIS. I don't know, do you know if it is, or?
I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll look it up right now.
All right, yeah, I opened the GIS, but I feel like it's probably on there somewhere, but I'm not an expert on how to operate the GIS, so hopefully we can look into that, because that would be a useful resource to put on the website for the trust, and then also to send around to the membership to have. So, Tom, really grateful for your time. Does anyone else have questions specifically for Tom? No? Seeing none. Obviously, we appreciate you. Welcome to stick around, but I know it's late on a couple hours after your work schedule, so we appreciate you being here. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So thank you. So with that, we'll move to the next item on the agenda, which is just talking through some examples of mission statements, goals, and funding sources from other communities. So I sent this around to the membership via email, but I'm going to read through them a little bit for the record and kind of for the benefit of viewers, and then maybe we can discuss them a bit. So there was no sort of scientific method to which ones I picked out. I was just spent a couple days on Google and kind of looked through ones that seemed interesting. Most of the mission statements are pretty simple. To give an example, Beverly's mission statement is, the mission of the Beverly Affordable Housing Trust is to maximize access to affordable housing in Beverly for low to moderate income households. So it's short, but one thing that's interesting about this one is that it's to the point. It specifically says low to moderate income households. It kind of sets a definition for what they're trying to do. Chelsea's mission statement is a little bit longer. It's the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board oversees the City of Chelsea's Affordable Housing Trust Fund. The board advises and assists in the creation of new affordable housing and the preservation, rehabilitation, and maintenance of existing affordable housing in the City of Chelsea. So Chelsea's kind of is a little bit more prescriptive in, like, these are the two activities that we do.
Yeah, Jersey is one of the biggest
Yeah.
affordable housing. TND, they have built it up like a neighborhood,
Yeah.
with houses, townhouses and buildings. And they have a great opportunity, including the old people living there. They working with them after that, a volunteer on different projects around Chelsea. So I think they have doing a great job in Chelsea, the way that they are doing the affordable housing over there.
I would agree with that. And one of my goals is to get the chair of Chelsea's Trust to speak to us, to give an example of some of the work that they do for kind of additional inspiration. So another mission statement I'll read from is Arlington's. So theirs says, the purpose of the trust shall be to provide for the preservation and creation of affordable housing in the town of Arlington as defined by the Arlington zoning bylaw for the benefit of households earning at or below 80% area median income. So again, theirs is specific, right? Theirs says this is the income level that we serve. So we could consider doing something like that, or we could not, right? I think we can discuss kind of what makes sense for us. Canton's is pretty similar. I won't read through all of them. I will publish all of these online, but I'll just read two more. One is Wayland's. Wayland says, the purpose of the trust is to provide for the creation and preservation of affordable housing in Wayland for the benefit of low and moderate income households. The board will strive for geographical diversity for the benefit of the entire town. So there specifically mentions in the mission statement that they want sort of geographical diversity, meaning that they want these projects that they fund to be in all the different neighborhoods of the community. Kind of to Jan's point, right? Jan, I think, had made a similar point, and I think that's important. And then one more I'll read from a mission statement is, the mission of Newton's Affordable Housing Trust is to preserve existing affordable housing units and create new affordable units that are affordable to low and moderate income households, which are those that make less than 80% of area median income. The trust has the ability to create a streamlined process to provide funding to new affordable housing projects and take advantage of development opportunities which might not otherwise be available to the city. So theirs is a little bit more wordy. It's Newton, so they have to go overboard a little bit. So those are some examples of mission statements. I'll post them all. I think we obviously would want to maybe sharpen our focus a bit before we try putting one on paper. I think at some point it'll make sense to have like a subcommittee whose job is to maybe bring a first draft to us, and we can get to that. So that was a little bit about mission statements. I am going to read a couple other things, and then I'll open it up to folks' comments. A lot of these affordable housing trusts also define their goals, either on the website or in their sort of founding document. Beverly's is a pretty good one. I really enjoyed kind of reading through their file. The goals that they list are fund and promote housing opportunities for low to moderate income households, maximize the number of households served at a range of income levels, support projects that provide long-term affordability, encourage the creation of housing that employees of local companies can afford, and improves access to Beverly residents by favoring project proposals that include a local preference. Promote fair and equal access to housing geographically across the city. Encourage transit-oriented development. Support those who want to improve the existing housing stock, particularly for people with disabilities, seniors, or those earning lower incomes. And leverage other housing resources and work with community partners to create new and preserve existing affordable housing units. All stuff that we've talked about, and kind of to stuff that Tom mentioned. So very familiar things there. Now, one that reads a little bit differently is Canton's, and again, I'm not going to read all of them because, you know, we could be here all day. I'll post them, but I'll just read this one because I thought it was interesting because it was a little different. Their goals section is a paragraph. It says, affordable housing can take many forms. There is a need and desire for missing middle housing. This might include small, single-family homes or cottages, two-family, three-family, quads, townhomes, or small apartment buildings. These are both more naturally affordable due to smaller sizes and can be deed restricted and placed on the affordable housing inventory. New affordable housing units do not necessarily need to take the form of a very large apartment complex with hundreds of units. One of the main goals of the trust will be to simply preserve affordable housing units that Canton already has, rather than build new units. Another housing goal for Canton is to increase the affordability of the existing market rate housing. That can be done through a first-time homebuyer program or through rental assistance. And finally, the trust may selectively and thoughtfully seek to increase affordable housing as part of a missing middle, smaller scale housing development close to transit and services. Reason why I wanted to read theirs is because they kind of are pretty specific on not having a focus on like an inclusionary zoning strategy where, you know, to oversimplify, it's, well, 1,000 units are being built across these developments, and so set aside 100 for affordability, and we've hit kind of an affordable number. Canton was not in favor of that kind of approach, and they made it clear to spell out in their trust, like, these are some other types of strategies for affordable housing that we're interested in. I think that's an important one for us to consider because the council has spoken, you know, on the inclusionary zoning. So I think that there's no point in the short term and kind of making that the centerpiece of a affordable housing strategy because that wouldn't be appropriate, right? The council is the elected officials. They are elected on the people, they're on their behalf, and that's the vote that they made, and that has to be respected. So I think figuring out strategies from communities that also don't have the ordinance in place is probably something that we should be looking into. And I liked that they spelled out, you know, different kind of smaller scale opportunities, and then also preserving affordability of existing kind of market rate units. Frankly, one of the other things that I think Revere specifically, you know, we talked about regional challenges. What are some that are more specific to Revere? You do see the issue of existing affordable, either deed restricted or otherwise, becoming unaffordable, either because the property is like bought, renovated, flipped, and made into sort of a higher end property, or just kind of natural market pressure means a unit that rented for $1,600 a month 2 years ago, now they can get $2,200 a month for it, and that's the difference between a moderate to low income family being able to afford that unit and not, and moving out of the community. When we think about like what are strategies that we can do that maybe are a little bit more digestible at the size of the resources that we have, that's something that I think, just speaking for myself, that we should be thinking about is how can we preserve the affordable housing that exists, both deed restricted and not, because we are facing that pressure that we've seen in other communities, that wave of whatever you want to call it, gentrification, displacement, you know, lots of different, whatever terminology you want to use, it's something that we see happening around the region, and it's something that we can, I think, dig into as one of our goals. So I shared the full document with all of you, and we'll post them on the website as well. But I did just want to stop and see if anyone had any questions or comments about those mission statements or goals.
Sure, thanks again for doing the research and sharing these documents. I too thought they were very helpful to get a general sense of how mission statements are done across the different communities that have them. The few things I want to emphasize, like you said, whatever we decide to do should align with what the city council has already kind of put out there in terms of what their goals are for housing, affordable housing in the community, as well as the alignment for what gentleman Tom mentioned and some of the other housing authorities. So the extent to which we can take what they have already to craft our own to complement it, I think would be a good step. The other thing is that I do like, for example, Beverly's mission statement as well as Newton. The reason why I liked it, because yes, they had a very succinct one-line mission statement, but they had some objectives that were measurable and were fairly easy to kind of follow to see. It was not so specific where it constrains them to these objectives, but it was broad enough that allowed them. It's broad enough, but specific enough to allow them to measure progress, and so that's a big thing. The two things again. One, making sure that whatever we decide to do aligns with the city and the other housing folks that are stakeholders in this affordable housing space, as well as making sure that our mission statement they include things that can be measured for progress. Thank you.
We have a deadline for show our project, our plan to the city council.
No, I think what's important is we obviously want to make sure that we're demonstrating progress. But I think it's good that we don't have a specific deadline, because I think what we need to be thoughtful, right? We want to make sure that we're taking our time to do this right. I would not want to take too long, to kind of get our bearings, but we're not working on a specific timeline. That's a good question though. Thank you. We may choose to create one for ourselves, but that's maybe not worth the pressure of putting on ourselves here. We want to make sure that we're setting achievable goals. Any other comments on this piece? I see Jan.
Was just wondering, you mentioned that you were going to talk to, I believe you said the Chelsea
Yes.
Affordable Housing Trust. Are there other groups that you are going to speak to, or did you just want to speak to them? Again, apologize for my camera. It seems to think it's on.
That's okay. No worries, and appreciate you participating despite technical challenges and having a cold too. So we're glad you're here. I would really like to hear from a lot of different communities that are doing this kind of work. I've actually, and I'll get to this in a moment, I had a phone call with Arlington's Affordable Housing Trust Chair to ask some questions about some of their sort of startup process. I've talked to a few different organizations that work in housing about maybe coming and speaking at some of our meetings. So I would just put it out there to all of you as well, on the membership, as well as any members of the public that have folks in this space that might have some expertise or some value to offer to us to come and speak at one of our meetings. Let me know, let us know, invite them. We'd love to hear from them. I think we should certainly be focused on learning, making sure that we're learning and not reinventing the wheel, because there's other communities that are doing some of this work already. That's a great question. Okay. Alrighty. So one other thing I wanted to mention, and being mindful of time, I sent this out via email as well. Something that Arlington did in the process of starting up and developing their goals and their mission statement for the Affordable Housing Trust is they actually did a public feedback, like a survey via Google Forms, as well as a series of public forums, like focus groups. So it wasn't necessarily like people stand in line and come up and speak, but it was focus groups of, we have this demographic or this group, like veterans or seniors, that's affected, and we want to have kind of a forum to talk about those issues, and did that over a series of months. I'm gonna share just briefly a little bit about some of the questions that they asked as part of this, and I'll send out sort of some of the results that came through. But they asked for some demographic info on a survey, you know, of how long have you lived in town, what's your age, do you rent or own, what's your income? And then they asked a few questions. They asked, do you think Arlington has enough affordable housing? And then they asked, which populations should be prioritized for affordable housing in Arlington? So this included, this was open-ended. They let people give their own responses to that. And so the number one response was families, 63%. Second highest response was seniors. The third highest response was people experiencing homelessness. And the fourth highest response was people with special needs or disabilities. Other suggestions that came in included immigrants, veterans, survivors of domestic violence, town employees, young people, people in service industries, and several others. So that was helpful to kind of get a sense of kind of maybe what the public was thinking. The survey also asked how folks felt about prioritizing sort of specific income levels for affordable housing. Low income, extremely low income, moderate income, et cetera. There was in general higher support in Arlington for supporting the lowest income households rather than all the way through moderate, although there was a pretty decent amount of support for all of the above. And then they did some surveys on different strategies. You know, which strategies do you think would be most helpful in creating or preserving affordable housing? So that included incentivizing the development of affordable housing, creating local funds to renovate or modernize existing housing, to have policy advocacy for zoning changes and things like that. So they put that out there and asked a series of questions about like what are different strategies and do you think this would be effective, to get a sense of the public's thoughts on that. And then they also asked a series of kind of statements and asked which one do they most agree with. And I think it would be interesting to kind of see how this came down in our community too. The most common response to, or which statement they agreed with the most is, I want Arlington to create more affordable housing, and I think additional housing could improve our community and help address the region's housing shortage. 61% picked that one. 13% each picked, I am unsure whether I favor additional housing in Arlington, but I support it if that's how we can best create affordable housing. And I want Arlington to create more affordable housing, but only if it does not materially increase our population. 7% said, I do not support additional housing or additional affordable housing. And 2% said, I don't favor more affordable housing, but I do support more housing. So just kind of getting a scope of, sometimes that question gets jumbled up in people's minds, like building more housing versus building affordable housing. And I think it was interesting the way they asked that question to try to kind of dig into the differences in public opinions there. I'll send to like some of the listening sessions they did. Like for instance, in order to make these thoughtful, right? And so not like free-for-alls, but really like getting really thoughtful responses and having good conversations that respected lots of different people's opinions, they would put out a few questions for these listening sessions. So one of them was, what ideas do you have for creating and preserving affordable housing in the town? How do you think we can best help people stay in Arlington that are longtime residents? What have you seen other communities do that we can learn from? And what do you think the trust can accomplish in the next year, next several years, or in the long term? And then, like I said, they did a series of these kind of outreach listening sessions, small group sessions, and they also had web-based comments. So I thought that was interesting. I'm not sure if we'd want to go down that route of doing a full survey or maybe a smaller scale outreach session, but wanted to kind of get folks' thoughts on what they thought about reading through those results and if they think that might be a good idea for us to consider as well.
About the focus
I
group,
would
right?
like to see us do a survey like that. Sorry to jump in. There's
Okay,
Camera again.
about the focus group working with the survey, you are a special group, or we have to create it, or they have a special organizations inside the city, like a review housing coalition, or?
So that would be up to us, right? We could decide how to do it. So Arlington, they had considered using like a polling agency, and instead they decided to just create a Google form, and the trust kind of did the legwork themselves. That's a lot of work. We are volunteers, so we may consider using an existing organization, either that does polling or does community outreach. That would be up to us to decide. So I think it's worth thinking about what would be, the most effective way to go about something like this. So, other comments on the survey?
I think public participation is always a great thing, and the extent to which we can encourage that, I fully support.
Excellent. So I will send around those survey results and the kind of presentation they put together, and we'll put that on the website as well for folks to review at home. Let's see, then next, so we have just a couple more items on the agenda. One is discussion of funding sources. This probably could be and should be its own full meeting because the rubber hits the road with having the money and having the resources to be able to do all the things that we're trying to do. As we discussed, the funding sources that we have now are a certain portion of the city's free cash at the end of the fiscal year that's been committed to us, as well as any sort of negotiated fees with developers, because there's no mandatory for inclusionary zoning, but it may be negotiated as part of a development. So anything beyond that, we have to, be creative, and we have to look into what options are out there. I do want to open it up for people's thoughts on this briefly. I think this could be both its own full meeting, and then Anayo had suggested, and I agree with, we should establish a subcommittee whose job is to focus on fundraising, along with a number of other subcommittees too. And actually, one of the things that I would like to do, and this is a note to myself as much as anything, is check with the clerk. So we had talked about the possibility of having a special Zoom-only meeting to talk about the mission statement. And it came to my attention that rightly, this is a good rule passed by the city council, that we're not supposed to hold meetings before 5 o'clock to make sure that public can come to the meetings. I do want to clarify if that applies to a subcommittee, where if we created a subgroup to specifically work on one issue, they may have more flexibility to meet in the afternoon or something. So I want to find out, and so I will find out, and then once I learn what the rules are for that, we'll form some subcommittees so that we can maybe bring action items to the broader group without it having to be all while we're here in front of the viewing public and making it a long process. So I agree that establishing a fundraising subcommittee would be a good idea, because we definitely want to do some private fundraising, right? Whether it be from foundations or financial institutions or developers or residents of the community that are interested in funding this kind of work. So, and I know you had specifically had a few things to say about this, so I wanted to let you speak first to it.
Yeah, thank you for adding this to the agenda item. I mentioned it earlier because I think fundraising particularly is a labor-intensive activity, and it's probably even more efficient to do it with a smaller group of folks that can go and dig into the weeds, to make the calls, to come up with, obviously this is guided by our larger community and the committee itself and obviously the council, but just the nit and grit of doing the what needs to be done in order of putting together an action plan where objectives are met and action items are taken by individuals who are responsible for delivering those goods. Additionally, we can make contacts a little easier if you have the authority of a fundraising committee. Let's say if I would reach out to our community in terms of stakeholders or financial institutions that might be willing to help, or private donors, it's a lot easier to make those calls as an individual subgroup and then take that work and bring it back to the larger committee for review. So that's one of the ways I'd recommend us to consider creating a fundraising group within our group, so that those of us who have those expertise can exploit them for the benefit of the group, and also for those who want to participate can, and they have a way to do it that's a little bit more efficient than waiting for the General Assembly. So that's just one suggestion I had.
I agree fully. Any other thoughts on that?
Thank you for all information you share, and I can pronounce the last name. Okay, and no, it's good to know more information. I hope so we can meet in, not just one time a month, another meetings, external meetings to more deep, working hard at, on this affordable housing trust fund, and we can get it as soon as we can.
Jan, anything to add there? I see your hand, so.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we could also, when we reach out to the other affordable housing trust funds, ask them about their funding. Other than that, I could offer to have a bake sale. But we definitely need to speak to those other organizations and maybe also speak to TND about where they get their funding.
Absolutely. And just, I will read out one example of funding sources from another community, because Beverly does a good job of spelling theirs out on their website. So they write, the Beverly Affordable Housing Trust is funded through contributions from developers under the inclusionary zoning ordinance, so not applicable to us. Funds appropriated under the Community Preservation Act, also not applicable to us yet. I'm hopeful that we eventually adopt the Community Preservation Act, but that's a separate issue. As well as other potential private fundraising sources. So they do private fundraising, apply for grants, or perhaps have, whether it be a bake sale or a dinner, other kind of strategies to raise funds. So I am going to propose, unless anyone objects, that we shelve getting into the weeds on funding sources until A, we can dedicate like maybe a full meeting to it, and or B, I get clarification on the rules for establishing subcommittees, so that way anyone that's interested in participating in the fundraising piece can dig into that and have a full conversation on it. So if anyone objects to that, let me know, but I think that would make the most sense. Okay, so I guess last piece of business here would be, one other thing that I had meant to address was, and I think that will apply as well to sort of, we had talked about establishing leadership positions, like a secretary, a treasurer, a vice chair. We're in the process of hopefully adding a few new members, so we'll get you all posted on that, and I'm hopeful that we have a few people apply to join. We do have a few vacancies. So if you're interested, if you're watching this, if you've been watching us for an hour and a half, you should probably apply to join, because you're probably really interested in this issue and have something useful to say about it. So definitely reach out to the mayor's office about that. But we have a few folks that we think are interested, and then we could have more robust committees too. So I think we should hold off on forming any of those at this time. But if I want to make sure that that's unanimous before I move on. Great. Okay, so the last piece here, as always, will be a public comment period. Before I get to any members of the public, one comment does come from the mayor. Mayor Arrigo did write a letter to address the committee and its work, so I'm just going to read that briefly as he was unable to attend. So this came from Mayor Arrigo, a letter so it says, "Dear members of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board, first and foremost, I write to express my sincere gratitude to all of you for serving as inaugural members of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board of Trustees. As the fastest growing city in the Commonwealth, the establishment of the Affordable Housing Board comes at a pivotal moment in our city's history. As we developed the 2020 City Master Plan, Next Stop Revere, it was clear that we needed a concrete plan to tackle many of the housing issues we are facing in the city of Revere. The housing crisis has recently plagued the Commonwealth and countless communities throughout the United States. I'm confident that Revere's Affordable Housing Board will do great work for our residents that will have a lasting impact for generations to come. I look forward to all that this board will accomplish moving forward, and please know that you're welcome to stop by my office if I can be of any assistance. Regards, Mayor Brian Amerigo." So thank you, Mr. Mayor. And then There's nobody present here for comment. I do see, I think, one person on Zoom, so I'm not sure if they wanted to make a comment, but if you do, feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself. All right, seeing none. Terrific. So that concludes the formal agenda. Does anyone have any late add items or kind of urgent things to address?
No, thank you.
All right.
Yeah, no, good.
Okay, so with that, do we have a motion to adjourn?
We do.
All right, motion second. Any objection? Seeing none, meeting adjourned. We'll see you all on the second Wednesday of January. And then for the members, I'll follow up via email with minutes from this and some follow-up items. And then for members of the public as well, this will be available to the website, all the agendas and the minutes. Excellent. Thanks, everyone.